Welcome, friends, neighbors, loved ones. Here we are again. We are lighting the candle and we are creating a world that works. So each week we get together and a few of us show up for a conversation to more or less kick around what do we need to do to really get things started and fired up here with regard to empowerment and to spread that to all of our friends and the rest of humanity. So with that in mind, I'll just tell you I'm Bill Carell. It's kind of an interesting place to be every week, and there's always some really great conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Ken in a moment, but Ken, I had some ideas about maybe diving into some of the aspects of empowerment. We've talked about that a little bit in the past, but if we were going to put together, some sort of a primer or primer, depending on where you went to school, on what the elements of empowerment would be. Welcome, Shelley. Good to have you here. So after you've identified yourself, could you come up with maybe 2 or 3 crucial ingredients to empowerment, Mr. Caputo?
Interesting. Okay, so I'm Ken Caputo, and I'm the founder of Quester's Way. And and that's an interesting question. I think that for a lot of people, there's different definitions of empowerment. I've spoken with people who confuse it with enlightenment. So there's, so I think that, that's one of the challenges is coming to an agreed upon definition of what we're talking about. So, so do you want to define, what's the parameters?
I love what you just said. I think there's a relationship between enlightenment and empowerment, such as there is between responsibility and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Enlightenment has nothing to do with taking action. It only has to do with creating a space and a clearing, I say, to where you can actually evaluate, the information that's present for you on your own terms and not have it be as a result of something. It's not a reaction to or a response to something. Enlightenment has to do with, I don't know, I've heard, some of my old friends called it the opposite of inhebiment, okay? Where there's no longer, it's more like lightness in terms of weight as opposed to having all of these concerns that are undistinguished. And the relationship of that to empowerment, and empowerment is in the position of being able to act, that not only is it having a clearing, but it's also having a choice and the ability to make something happen if you choose to do so. So none of those are actually true or Webster definitions. That's just what Bill Carell's saying on Wednesday or Thursday morning here. I never know what it is.
So my mentor, his explanation for enlightenment was very simple. Yeah. And first, my favorite story of enlightenment was someone asked the Dalai Lama, "Are you enlightened?" And he paused for a second and he said, "Not at the moment." And I just thought that was a beautiful response that said so much. Yeah. But what my mentor was saying was really, it's, if you think about, if 75-ish% of the time you're in the present moment, you're recognizing where you are, and the other 25% of the time you're in the past or future, that's enlightenment. And and what he would always say is, if your center of gravity is in the past, that leads to depression. If you spend a lot of time there, if your center of gravity is in the future, that leads to anxiety and all of the imbalances that those represent. So the outcome, and he said, really, if you can get to where 50% of your time you're consciously present in this conversation, this moment, not thinking about, being preoccupied with how people are taking what I'm saying right now, or thinking about past times where I was successful doing this or unsuccessful, just here in the conversation, then you're in a state of enlightenment. That's really all it is. He also takes it a step further. Beyond enlightenment is liberation. And that is a place of non-fear and non-doubt, is the way he describes it. And it's really just a higher percentage. I mean, 90% of the time, you're truly present in your life and the moment, which is the only moment you have. And then to keep you humble, there's the past and the future as, reference points. So that's my little shtick on enlightenment as it was shared with me. And for empowerment, I think we use a model. Like when we don't talk about education, first of all, in Quester's way, or even teaching. We talk about learning, and everything is geared around, the result, which is learning. Education is like an institution or a system, not unnecessary, but our focal point is on learning, and our main mission is empowered learning. So, and when we talk about empowered learning, what we're really doing is helping to do our part to instill belief in the person's ability to learn. So I think that's the first thing is, empowerment requires belief that you have that ability to, to grow in some capacity, right? So, and that belief frees you. It helps you overcome all the fears and inhibitions to take the action you're talking about. And I think the other thing about empowerment is the releasing from the attachment to feeling you need to be right. And just another thing that was said to me, one of my favorite quotes is the only mistake is not learning. And, when we're worried, we look at a lot of kids in school, they're afraid to get a bad grade. They're afraid to answer something wrong. So rather than understand there's tremendous value in their willingness to basically make mistakes, to screw up, all that kind of stuff, that's an empowered approach, and our job as teachers is to encourage and facilitate what they do with that and make it easier and easier for them to, believe in their own capacity to grow and evolve, and also believe in their ability to navigate whether they're right or wrong, so those would be the two things.
Interesting. So if we could just play with this for a little while and keep distinguishing empowerment and enlightenment, if you take it from a strictly, like what happens to go shift from unenlightened to being enlightened. And it always is a present state of mind. It's never a state that you achieve and now you're, like a cool guy that sits on a mountaintop and no matter what comes into your head, your navel is pretty interesting, Mm-hmm. It's more like a situation where the light comes on, okay? And it disrupts the darkness that was there before and puts you into a state of clarity, where it's just very, very easy to see what's what. And empowerment also is a similar type of an awareness. However, it's an awareness, and it's an awareness of, in terms of your being enlightened and empowered at the same time. Therein, gives you the greatest, point of where marginal enlightenment equals marginal empowerment. This is where the world shifts. This is what causes things to happen in the future that weren't going to happen anyway. This is where you now have the ability to listen powerfully, speak powerfully, and act powerfully. So the whole idea with empowerment is, if you were to look at it like a pitcher of water, with being completely full, there's no more room for any additional empowerment. I would say that is, being able to discern the undistinguished portion of what is going on in your head, the past, the future, and the present, and then be able to sort those out so that there's a clarity in terms of making your decision and the next action you're going to take. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of words, but the whole point is that I think one is a light switch coming on where you now can see what may not have been, visible to you prior to that. And then the next is to see a path and an action possibility, like a way forward, if you will. And that where you seem to have been stuck before empowerment, you seem to have been in the dark before enlightenment, those things are not mutually exclusive. They kind of need to happen at the same time, in my view. And when they do, and they do it in a group phenomenon, where there's a cultural setting and people are interested in the conversation and someone wants something to happen, it can.
Yeah. It's so there's a progression that was shared with me, and all of these things are things that have been shared with me over the years from people I trust. So take it for what it is. Like my mentor always says, I wasn't smart enough to figure any of this out. But one of the things he shares, it's just what you're talking about with that overlap. He said there's like this progression of views, and for which view receives the most attention can determine where you are in that spectrum. And he starts with like the victim view, where basically things happen to you. And it's Michael Singer says it. His quote is, "I'm not okay. What are you going to do about it?" It's all these things outside of yourself. It's your upbringing, your socioeconomic status, the social media, whatever, right? So then the next stage is the manifestor view, where you're like, you know what? I can do something about this. I can pull myself up and I can make something of myself, and it's very kind of, you take control of your life basically, and you start manifesting things through your actions. You make things happen. So if you think of these as views, if you're in the victim view, it's very, very hard to take action because you don't feel like you have any control. All you can do is shrug your shoulders, right? So, but when you go to the manifestor, now it's kind of Dan Sullivan in Strategic Coach talks about the rugged individualist. It's you against the world, and you're just going to beat it down, and all the selfies, look at me, I've done these things, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's an important, view to have. So then the third one is the we view, which is where you start to recognize that your true value, your true success comes as it relates to each other. Like this would be a boring monologue if it was just you or just me talking. It's a much more invigorating dialogue because the two of us can work together to relay some interesting ideas and messages for people to consider. So, from a business standpoint, I used to just run everything myself teaching martial arts, but the real value didn't come about until I recognized how important it was to have other people and develop a team where they could all contribute and we could all kind of amplify each other's successes and skills and that kind of thing. So, and then from there, the fourth is the enlightenment, where, you just reach a point of recognizing where things are, and you don't overly attach significance to the outcomes. You're just navigating in real time, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't, and it's just, and if you make empowered choices, you can move things in what you think is a better direction. You don't just sit there and let it happen to you. But it's less, I guess from my understanding, it's kind of less stressful, and like the Tao would say, if you want to empower a system, if you want to energize a system, you don't make it happen. You stay open to the fact that there's the potential for it to happen, and then look for ways to influence it when the right opportunity, do a little bit of right time instead of a lot of it wrong. And, so yeah.
So the other thing that I'm hearing in what you're saying, the idea of a conversation or a dialogue kind of gives rise to the idea that the knowledge that you're starting with in any situation is good, and God bless you for it. You worked hard to get there. It's come probably from a lot of other conversations.
Yeah.
But where life actually shifts, both personally and culturally, is when there's a conversation that's previously been unavailable.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know about that. where you really start to, once you've run out of all of the isms and, the wisdom from the ancients and all those other things, it's what you say when there's no longer any of that stuff available that's appropriate to say, and it's clear to you that the only thing there is available to say that makes any difference at all is something new, something that has been heretofore unsayable and unsaid.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't even mean that it's unsayable and unsaid as far as mankind is concerned. It may just be in a particular environment with a particular set of players that what's going to happen is something is going to dictate the conversation. And for example, when we get on the call every single week, I say something and then you folks respond, and you give back and you generously share whatever it is that you have to give. And what I wonder is, how do we generate a conversation that people can actually hear, that they will find not only interesting, relevant, but how about maybe necessary? Or maybe that there's an opportunity here for us to take a situation where people are not listening to each other a lot. And as a matter of fact, we've got most of the people that we see, on our computer screen that are speaking, they're in the send mode. There's almost nobody who's saying, well, how are you all doing out there? All 350 or 60, or we don't know how many there actually are of you out there in the United States right now, but how are you all doing? And see what, just kind of pinging. I think mostly what I see in terms of what I call them weather reports. We've had this conversation before. It's the sort of thing that doesn't have to have any truth to it. It doesn't have to have it only has to be plausible. It only has to be something that falls into the realm of this is reasonable for this report to be true. And more often than not, because it's a weather report, it's not verifiable. It has absolutely no value for the future. It only has value for keeping a weather pattern in place as long as you say it's there. And for instance, now, did you experience the earthquake we had week before last?
Yes. Yeah.
So
everybody was so freaked out by that. That was an unusual thing in this area.
Would you like to share your experience of how that was for you? What happened and what was your response?
It was just kind of, recognizing, wow, that's unusual. There's a feeling of kind of vibration out of nowhere. And then, I think it was really just my response was curiosity. Is everything okay? And what was that? So, and then just going through, it's funny for that kind of thing. The quickest thing is social media, because everybody starts asking the same question and someone will answer it. So it was pretty quick, to find out what had happened, and it was interesting. And I guess my reference base was thinking about areas where that's more prevalent. Like if you live on the West Coast, they live with this all the time. It's like living in the Midwest, and tornadoes are things that we freak out about, when even the possibility of it, they're living with knowing that one of these bombs could go off in their neighborhood at any time, So I just thought about the relative safety that we live under and the fact that it was an unusual event. And that was kind of it. And then just life went on,
It was kind of an interesting disruptor in our house. The last washing machine that we had a problem with its suspension system. And I'm married to a swamp Yankee who never throws away anything until it's way long past its usefulness, right? We lived through probably 7 or 8 months of this. Every time there was a spin cycle of it sounding like a 747 was taking off in the other room, So when I first started to hear the low rumble, and it sounded an awful lot like that. I mean, it sounded like, the washing machine that was eccentric and making a lot of.
Oh, yeah.
So that usually defines itself. Of course, we don't have that washing machine anymore. We have one that's really, really quiet now. And the thing didn't go away. And I'm counting to myself 1,008, 1,009, 1,000. What in the hell is going on around here? So the next thing I know, it came to a peak and was really quite loud and shook the room, Mm-hmm. Not to the degree of my experience being out in San Francisco, during one of their tremors, where stuff on the shelves vibrate and make a lot of noise.
Right.
It shook the room, it shook my chair, and it shook me while I was in it. And the cat just happened to be in my lap at the same time as well, and he looked around like really completely confused and had to hop off my lap because he thought I was, Next thing I know, Jan comes through the door and she goes, "Was that an earthquake?" I said, "Yeah, I think it was." I believe it was an earthquake, What comes to mind is that whole monologue from Bill Cosby, where he's talking about Lombard Street and and signage for bumps. The best place to put a bump is after you hit it. That was just a bump that you hit, just so you can know. So I hopped on Facebook and asked, I think we had an earthquake. Anybody know? And it didn't take more than 4 or 5 minutes for about 25 or 30 posts. And what was interesting is one of them said, that it looks like the epicenter is over in Cape Cod. And the other one said, no, it's in North Kingston, Rhode Island. No, it's off the shore in Rhode Island. And so we went and started looking, at the national map for tremors and found the exact location, and then a big old circle that said it went as far west as probably Meriden, western part of the state, and as far east as out to sea, on the east of Cape Cod. So now all of those things that shifted reality for a moment, and we talked about something that was completely not there before. Mm-hmm. An event occurred, and then we had to process, what was that? How was it for you? Everything okay? Everybody still all right? Et cetera. And I think it's a good kind of a metaphor or an analogy to how we live a lot of our lives. Mm. Where it's important to be able to go in and verify and check in with other human beings that are going through a similar experience, or at least are proximate to the same physical experience that you and I are going through. And that if you get to that point where you get a chance to, get the nuances, well, no, it wasn't quite that, it was this, or maybe it was something else entirely. I had to laugh because one of the things that somebody said was, "There go those Russians again," So the whole access to going forward after an event like that is somewhere between, well, okay, so that's over, and it also reminded me a little bit about being out on the golf course and getting the news on 9/11 that we're on the golf course 20 years ago, and they on golf courses they have these guys called rangers. That go around and make sure that people are moving at a good rate and everything. And he comes, to my friend Red and me, and he says, "Did you hear that that a plane flew into the World Trade Center?" And I looked at the guy, and Red looked at the guy. "No, what's the punchline?" A plane flew into the World Trade Center. These are those things that are absolutely unknowable, unsayable. And then it turns out afterwards that not only was that one and another one and another one and another one. So there were 4 plane bombs that were set into action at roughly the same time. And 2 of them were direct hits and home runs from the planner's perspective. The other 2, one of them got taken down by a bunch of heroes, in Pennsylvania over a field. And then the other one, instead of hitting the White House, wound up hitting part of the Pentagon. And when you think about how that's possible, what sort of thinking in the world would allow for that to be A, acceptable, or B, doable, or C, actionable. When you think in terms of what it would take for the whole community to provide the access to being able to do that, where all the information is kept about flights, where all the information is kept, and where you go to be trained, to fly IFR, a jumbo jet,
Mm-hmm.
and how open we were and naive as we walked around the world saying, yeah, come on in, we can deal with a little bit of this and a little bit of that, never really expecting that it could be a lot of this and a lot of that.
Yeah.
So that was my earlier experience with the earthquake. And, I looked at Jan, I said, these things usually have aftershocks. So it'll be interesting to see if we get any. I couldn't perceive any after that.
Yeah, me neither. But, it's interesting that, two things from how you experienced it. One was the value of social media expressed itself because you were able to reach out to the community and, with a concern that we all had, and we're able to share our experiences and get a quick reference base for whether we were safe or not. Are we okay? So that's, it's, social media is taking quite a beating right now, and justifiably so for the way it's being utilized. But it is still just a tool. So a hammer can build a house or it can crack a skull. The hammer is just a hammer. It's the intention behind it. So it's kind of cool that, I had a similar experience where the social media became something that was a valuable tool that allowed us to connect quickly and share experiences. The other thing that struck me was just, and I think this goes to, your earlier questions, your immediate response was to reference something you already knew, the washing machine, right? So for a lot of us, when we're trying to understand something that we don't currently understand, what do? We try to access, and our brain actually goes through this thing called a crisis scan, where when we go into, fear and adrenaline hits the system and all that kind of stuff happens, we immediately search for past experiences that seem relevant. And if we don't have that, we just grab at anything because we don't have access until we learn something, new on the other side of it. So it's just, it is kind of interesting. And I think that, how did 9/11 happen? Our what we represent created such a fundamental fear in people who don't agree with what we represent, whether it's democracy or capitalism, whatever, that they were motivated to look at systems we had in place that weren't necessarily designed, that they were designed so that people could travel from place to place. The airports were all designed so that they could work together, and people could now travel around the country. They weren't thinking about weaponizing planes. No one, even though that had been done, it was done in World War II with kamikaze pilots and everything. But this, so I think that there was a high level of motivation to protect something that other viewpoints saw as a threat to their way of life, and they found a way, so, and I just look at how polarized we are, in the US right now. And in the end, when I'm looking at different perspectives and points of view and the emotional energy that goes behind it, what they're really doing is defending their view of their preferred way of life against other people who have what they see as an opposing view. So, and when you're in that state, you're not going to have a conversation with people because they're not curious about your view. Like you're saying, they're attacking a threat, and I'm not even judging that. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just observing, what's occurring right now. So
that would be an excellent place for us to wrap this first segment and jump on again and maybe kind of look into a little bit more deeply with our folks at home that are watching and listening is what do we say that human nature is with regard to how these things get processed and how the systems get put into place, and how you're able to create a result over generations of time. This didn't all happen in a weekend or two. It was all long ball. It was all, we're setting up things that will set up things that will set up things. And then before you know it, we'll have these capacities. So with that said, I'm going to sign off and say this is Bill Carell. Thank you for joining us very much. And we'll be catching you on the flip side.
Sounds good.
Okay.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.